Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, to another chapter of Hazardous Technology and the Minds Who Make It, written by Ukulele Villain and read by yours truly, Freewata. Now, we are back here today. We're actually at what our author calls an intermission. And this is actually going to end up taking Caitlin's viewpoint instead of previously where we had like the end of chapter one, Powder delving into the lanes, I believe, trying to go save Victor on her own. She was asking Jace for help, and he maybe sort of will help on his side, but that'll remain to be seen. He's on his big wig journey to being a big councilman boy, and he can't go as quick as Powder would like. So in this intermission, we're gonna get Caitlin and see kind of her relationship. It seems like through it, and I've also got the end of chapter notes from the author, and I'll go ahead and read those out. Intermission delivered by other characters to set up part two, and to deliver a little bit of exposition and a sprinkle of other characters' biases. Point of view will return to Powder and Victor next chapter. Big thanks to everyone for the feedback and continued support. Thank you as well. And with that, let's get into it with the intermission. "5 years ago, Caitlin had approached Victor's teenage sister at the starting line of a rifle competition with a small overture of friendship. You look very nice in your uniform, Powder. It had been innocuous enough. Really? I think we all look like douchebags. The horn for the beginning of the competition had sounded off and had happily taken up space against Caitlin's shocked pause after Powder's swift and merciless delivery. Caitlin still pondered that exchange and loss 5 years later. As an enforcer, if she asked herself what she was shooting for, the answer was always Piltover. What was Powder shooting for? Well, the girl had worn the competition's uniform with her unregulation hair tucked into the back of her shirt, never moved close to the refreshments table, and maintained the aloofness Jace had said would be expected. Caitlin had hoped to extend an olive branch, a sense of solidarity for someone who was also an outsider like herself. It was fair and understandable that Powder had pushed it away. The soon-to-be enforcer had assumed the young academy girl was nervous to be competing against a group with better resources and more training. Caitlin had been told the girl and Victor were orphans. What are you shooting for? Powder that day had run through the cultivated forests near Piltover with the silence of a ghost and the wrath of a demon. The only time Caitlin and the other competitors had known she was nearby was the echoing thwack of a wooden target being blown to pieces. She was everywhere and nowhere, all at once. The fog from the morning mist clung and blinded them all except for her. Her laughter had competitors next to Caitlin cursing and shooting wildly, spooked like animals. Powder was shooting like her life depended on it, and making the rest of them understand that dreadful feeling. Of course, someone had immediately accused the cheeky Undercity girl of cheating when the fog cleared and they returned to the winner's tent. Powder had flinched before her face had then gone cold, wary as an entire tent of people began to condemn her. And before Caitlin could come to her defense, Powder had turned that chilled expression on her face into a smile, like a shark's hungry grin. Powder responded to the growing accusations, the whispers, with, "I asked if it was okay to climb the trees." Sheriff Marcus, who was overseeing the competition, had interjected. "You were encouraged to. It would be difficult to perform." "I bet you tell your wife that every night." She was digging the grave deeper to hide and flee, to also almost certainly take a few people down with her. The judges, and Caitlin's parents, were furious. The year after, a rule had to be added on account of the tree climbing incident. Powder had accepted the trophy. The platform of glaring judges made no move to hide their disbelief. They were almost comically angry. Powder smirked and winked, but it was clear to Caitlin the girl wanted nothing more than to run from them all. Her flamboyance couldn't take back the flinch Caitlin had seen. As the previous winner, Caitlin was required to congratulate Powder. Hey, Caitlin whispered. Good job. She meant it. The girl had not only climbed multiple trees, but had operated a cumbersome firearm in dense fog atop that. The 16-year-old girl was almost 4 years younger than the people she was competing against. Powder flinched again. Her mask fell for a second, and the most cautious gray eyes stared back at Caitlin. Thanks. Her face softened. An opportunity for parley arrived, and it was swiftly crushed. From behind Caitlin, her mother and father were unhappily watching. The audience in the tent had taken to whispering, Poor Caitlin. There was no way to reach Powder when the history between Piltover and Powder made an impossible chasm with no bridge to cross. Powder snorted, bitterly, and threw Caitlin's hand away. She darted and disappeared from the tent. The noise and explosive controversy diffused when she left them all. She was almost a ghost. The only thing she took from the competition was a lackluster trophy, swinging from twitching and angry hands. Caitlin, darling, her mother had called, keeping her from chasing after Powder. Darling, it's time to get ready. Her mother could fluctuate between a doting parent to a councilwoman who had given commands she did not expect to be ignored. Progress Day had a never-ending litany of events, one of which was a gala. Jace at least had been there. When Caitlin asked about Powder, her childhood friend sighed and pinched his brow. Heimerdinger didn't want her. I don't know. After she blew up my apartment. That was her? Caitlin had assumed Victor and her had actually been related. If she's having problems adjusting, Caitlin poignantly avoided saying anything about how Powder had been in Piltover for 5 years and was still struggling. Maybe she's not suited for the academy. She's an amazing shot. The Enforcers Corps could be better. It had been better for Caitlin. Caitlin, the daughter of a council member, felt like an outsider in her house. Pushed powerlessly from one place to the next, with no purpose besides being agreeable and a prized gem. Princesses and towers eventually all fled, though. Caitlin had found her escape in the pursuit and flight towards a justice that the Enforcer Corps offered. Jace had thrown back a glass of champagne in one swallow, his throat bobbing with the drink. He'd spent the last week preparing for Progress Day, and the effortlessness he had with socializing had begun to wane. I brought it up to Victor once. He won't hear anything about it. Jace shook his head, half amused and half confused by his Hextech partner. He was searching for the right words, and the champagne was making it difficult. She jumps into the lab through the windows. She literally climbed down the gutters after her detention, and he doesn't even look up from his desk. She could set fire to the entire academy, and he'd ponder it like when he tightens a bolt. With how much of our work he shares, if she ever decided to sell it and reproduce it, we would have a nightmare on our hands. You think she would do that? You think she could even do that? Caitlin couldn't believe the sly girl had that much vindictive mischief in her. It was concerning that Jace believed Powder at 15 was able to recreate Hextech. Not to Victor, but to me, without hesitation. Caitlin's mother tried to catch her eye from across the ballroom. Caitlin grabbed another glass of champagne. She had no time for her mother's attempts to play matchmaker between her and Jace. What happened to the rest of the people who broke into your apartment? Does Powder know? Victor won't ask her. I can guess, but it's not a happy story, Jace answered curtly. But his demeanor brightened and his frustration dropped when Councilwoman Medarda approached. They conversed, and through the night Caitlin and Jace talked and drank their way through Progress Day. No part of their night stuck with her as much as the conversation they'd had about Victor and Powder. Afterwards, Caitlin saw a little of Powder in the same way she saw a little of Victor. Jace filled up the space before both other scientists and socialite spheres Caitlin bounced between. Her life moved mechanically. analogous to Piltover pushing towards the future. Blimps and airships were launched across the country. A new device that could capture colorless images was purchased by her mother. Caitlin donned an enforcer's cap despite the tight-lipped responses of her family. Another 5 years passed, and it came with a new progress day and 4 enforcers dead. Caitlin awoke to the note delivered by one of Jace's assistants. The poor woman looked lost, and when she handed the delivery to Caitlin at the door, her mother was complaining the entire time. She seemed to try and run off the property. Caitlin grabbed her by the steps of the estate. "Wait, what's this?" "Councilman Talus wants you on the investigation." "Councilman?" Piltover cheered for the dawning of a new day, oblivious to what had happened in the night. Caitlin felt that something had fundamentally shifted, or perhaps had laid in wait to reveal itself from long ago. Intermission viewpoint is now changing to Jace. A decade ago, in the tedium of Hextech's genesis of paperwork and bureaucracy and hellish, never-ending questions from Heimerdinger, there was the comfortable bond Jace shared with Victor. Victor had helped Jace break into Heimerdinger's lab and saved his life. Not at the same time, but in 3 days of collaboration, Jace had found someone he considered an actual friend. He had never realized before that all the peers and social bubbles he had built up until Victor were hollow. Poetics tried to break into the event at the joints, but if Jace could summarize what he liked most about his new partner, it was that Victor was a true believer. He believed in Jace's vision. He believed in persistence and hard work in a future. He also believed in Powder, though. And while Victor's belief was refreshing and made the bond between the two inventors stronger than the mining cores below, it also made Victor stubborn as an angry mule. Jace had approached each subject around Powder delicately. "Is Powder okay with you spending so much time in the lab?" He had no good way to say, "It's unfair that Heimerdinger dropped this responsibility on your shoulders. It would be one thing if she behaved, but she needs someone more hands-on than you. These projects should be classified, and you're sharing them with someone who we know used to have a fascination with destructive weapons." Victor had his protective goggles on and was latching a levered crank onto a drill. He then began to turn the lever, powering the drill and creating a hole in the metal sheet. A loud, droning screech bounced across the room and stabbed Jace's skull. "She loves the lab," Victor yelled over the sound. "She doesn't mind." Jace couldn't hear himself over the whirring and screeching. "Victor!" Jace waited until Victor had finished with the sheet. But when he tried to begin again, Victor had already picked up a second sheet from a pile nearby. The screeching persisted. "You ass! Talk to me!" His friend, who kept mountains of mysteries close to his chest, could not be reasoned with. Most suggestions for how to better Powder's life were met with a non-committal, "I'll think on what you've said," or even more obtuse, "I'll see." Any broach of the subject was met with Victor's irritatingly civil responses or his weird avoidance tactics. Only once had Victor ever let his anger come through. Jace had seen his friend tease and cajole and calmly reason and cleverly and joyfully analyze. It was almost frightening to see anger. It was when Jace had suggested the Enforcer Corps. The brief flash of Victor's anger faded, though, and his co-creator and friend had suddenly been ashamed. "I don't know what came over me." Jace laughed dryly. "You don't have to be formal with me on this. You're my friend. I understand." He hadn't entirely understood, but Jace loathed to push the subject any further. And now, he wondered if he should have. Powder was entering the era of adulthood. Hextech was at its prime, and Victor had been kidnapped. And Jace had been thrust into a leadership role he realized he had no readiness for. "I could go to the Undercity myself. I could find him on my own." He had not been back to the Undercity in a decade, not since he had purchased goods that had led to a break-in. Jace considered, for a daunting and unholy second of asking Powder to go with him. She had been a kid when Victor had taken her in, but she had known that labyrinth of the lanes once. It would be an investigation led by himself, and they could have an official sanction from Caitlin and the enforcers. I wouldn't need Powder. She'd be a loose cannon. Caitlin's sway as an enforcer would be enough. I could actually trust her not to screw me over. Jace immediately went to a new ally with his idea. Mel Medarda listened to Jace's plan with calculating eyes. Even at the late hour of the night, her hair was done up, and the gold makeup she was fond of decorated her demeanor. She was always put together, always quick on the draw. Jace had found his affections growing for her at an alarming rate. She was also eerily similar to Victor. She was a believer, like Jace's partner, and with her, Jace saw a horizon of limitless potential. All right, are we getting a little bit of side action that Jace and Victor may be secretly a little bit more than we thought? I don't know. That little bit. You got me there. Okay, sorry, that was an aside. Her response, to his dismay though, was like a delicate stab between his ribs. You would get Victor killed, she continued after a pause. You're famous. Where you go, what you do, and who you support are all noticed by Piltover and Undercity alike. The blockade order has already started to be carried through. I can take it back. The blockade had been his first order to the enforcers, and had felt like the only logical pathway. Let me get my assistant Jace, if you call off the blockade now, you'll risk making Piltover look vulnerable, and you'll inspire conspiracy against you from the other members of the council. Mel wasn't chastising him. She was almost trying to talk him down. He wanted to rebel against her, but when she spoke next, he knew she was right. As a counselor, you play up the illusion of being chained to bureaucracy's desk, but in truth, you have more power here than any man running around the lanes pretending to be a king or vigilante lord. Going there now will put Victor in a position where he may have to make decisions that aren't his own. You could be harmed, and that would push Victor as well. You're right, he said, and then he kissed her. This situation and its many walls were closing in on Jace, and he could think of nothing more that he wanted to do, and nothing better to do. Jace felt her freeze, and he was momentarily terrified until she softened and pulled him through her door. Well, actually, I guess that wasn't Victor getting that then secretly. Damn, all right, Jace. This intermission now is in Marcus's perspective. I had to bury 4 enforcers. 4! The audacity Marcus delivered these angry complaints was backed by a decade of guilt and an ever-encroaching fear. The cycle was about to begin again. What had killed the previous sheriff, Grayson, would come for him. I hoped I would have more time. He had a daughter now. The heiress to Vander's legacy had been under Silco's thumb. The other one, the blue-haired runt, was kept in line by a convenient accident in the form of one of Talus's lackeys. Marcus had once tried to rein her in, recruit her to the enforcers to keep a better watch on her. It had failed, but it had proven she was fiercely loyal to her academy keeper and had no intention of returning to the Undercity. With the 2 sisters separated, there would be no reveal of his transgressions, and the order of the world was stable. But that was uncertain territory. His daughter could never know about how he had gone to the Undercity and dealt with the devil. His daughter could never know he was still dealing with the devil. Silco's office smelled of that reeking sweet and sickly shimmer shell. Silco could mask it with 100 other disgusting scents. Alcohol, cigars, fine leather, and fine wood furniture. It would never change what the Undercity was really. A mistake. Silco, the one-eyed freak, leaned forward and slowly let ash fall from his cigar. Marcus, I don't know why you're coming to me. The problem is quite simple, he responded with a smooth and lackadaisical tone. He was always entirely bored, or entirely unsurprised by what Marcus brought forward to their negotiations. She's your right hand, Silco sighed, not from weariness or sadness. He was sighing like the last threads of his patience were being snipped from the loom of his time. My second lieutenant is Civica. Violet was an intact dog. Was, Marcus said like an idiot. He cursed himself silently. Violet has made it clear she no longer wishes to inherit benefits from under my wing. The girl intends to start her own gang to contend with the Kim Barons and myself using what she stole from your treasure troves. You have your suspect, Marcus. Now use the opportunity. Or must I save your precious city myself? The bloody history that marked Vander's daughter working for Silco could not so easily be ignored. Silco seemed nonplussed, though. The industrialist lord who now ruled the Undercity did not take betrayal easily. Men who skimmed money from his coffers, bodyguards with loose lips, and crooked enforcers who were no longer sated by coin met unfortunate endings in the New World Order. The New World Order, after Vander, the Hound of the Underground, took his last stand. You think your underlings are going to let a show of disrespect like that go unpunished? Silco cocked his head to the side. The old man's damaged eye, a pupil like a hunk of amber in the whites replaced with pitch blackness, bore into Marcus's heart. His heart raced with a pitter-patter reserved for a field mice watching a cat prowl. Silco responded, Wouldn't you like to know? It's not that easy. It's never that easy with him. He's furious at her, but he's too smug as well. What are you planning, you snake? Silco turned from Marcus and began to poignantly ignore him. This was the cue that meant Marcus should leave. Of course, as he stood, Silco spoke up again. Another thing, Sheriff. Since you need a push in the right direction, why not find a way to strike down our mutual enemy, the Firelights, in this debacle? The Firelights have been undermining trade for a long time now. It was tempting, and Marcus was, not for the first time, begrudging following Silco's plans. The pathway already twisted and turned. This intermission now is moved into Echo's perspective. There was a time where Echo wouldn't stand up to Vi. He had been Benzo's protege, and she had been Vander's. It was simple. Two leaders of the failed Zon revolt securing a legacy for all of the Undercity. As a small child, he hadn't been able to articulate this pattern he saw in the world, but he had known it. He had seen that there were ridges and open areas for gears and mechanisms to be placed. The ecosystem of the lanes was greased with sacrifice and the protections of the Hound of the Underground. Yet, the Hound and Benzo knew they were getting older. Powder and Echo had been drawing once on the roof when she had asked, How old do you think Vander is? Like, maybe 60? What? No way, he's 50. He can't be 60. When I'm 20, he'll be 70. And that's too old. Powder and Echo had been able to spit number games at each other like duelers with pistols. Powder was great with the multiples, going higher until they'd finally reached numbers that seemed made up. How could there be thousands of anything? Benzo's told me Pilties can live to 100. Vi said only vampires could do that, Powder had said. Stammered at the idea of a vampire. Powder would run herself ragged thinking of monsters until she'd get Vi to show them a punch that could kill a vampire, or a sidekick that could obliterate a dragon. All I'm thinking of is Vladimir Shavana. There was a time where Echo wouldn't stand up to Vi. Now, he had to do it every day. The progress day raid against Silco had only partially succeeded. They had destroyed over 70 barrels of shimmer, but lost 2 friends in the process. 70 barrels of shimmer could be mined and manufactured in a month. He could not help but feel he had traded 2 lives away for something that could be easily regained in an ounce of time. 70. 70. Powder was haunting him again. Nostalgia was a more powerful substance than shimmer. It was why Silco had put up a statue of Vander near the last drop. The hero who had been the face of the end times. An end of times they'd had a say in. You're getting philosophical and sad. Stop that. Stop that right now. Echo's workshop had an open door policy, but most of his friends knew to give him space after a raid. He realized space was the last thing he wanted. The mourning was necessary and honorable, and he couldn't stand the lofty ideology of when he wanted proof of what he was fighting for near him. There was another thing Benzo and Vander had never taught him. Friends and comrades and family would blur together into one picture, and it wouldn't be a portrait of a sunny day. Vi hadn't learned that lesson either. She went through the Undercity with her gauntlets and wrath of demons. 10 years of paying for that tip he had given Powder had come down hard. He remembered Vi returning to the lanes, begging Vander to take his own gauntlets and march into Piltover to go save her sister. Everyone had known Powder was dead, and the hammer of enforcers was going to come down hard on them for the explosion above. Vi welcomed it. Vi wanted to fight. Vi paid the price. It was a tragedy, delivered in 3 parts. Echo moved to leave the simmering solitude he was marinating in. There would be time for this later in the night. At the door was Tick, letting in a few beautiful and curious green firelights from the tree base. Tick cleared his throat and delivered what would be the first toll of a death knell. Guys, in the last drop, say Vi's gone rogue. She's trying to gather forces. Says she's stolen some hex tech and a scientist. Echo. And the Firelights had been fighting the war against Silco for so long that sometimes it was easy to forget that Piltover was still suffocating them with a pillow from above. Hextech had served to make the Pilty somehow more comfortable, and everyone behind them more resigned to death. If Vi had Hextech, and if she knew how to use it, she'll crush anyone who stands up to her, burn us with the fire from the gods of Piltover. Tick continued. The second death knell came. Brivy also says someone's already looking for the guy that got kidnapped. An enforcer? No. A girl with blue hair braids. Also big techie glasses. She's at Vander's statue. And that, my friends, was the end of the intermission. Dang, all right, that whole intermission, I can see how that is a setup for part 2. And I think we were correct. Did we say we thought it was Echo, or did we think it was Vi earlier? Now I'm trying to remember. I think we had said it might have been Vi or Echo or something like that. But yeah, that makes sense. She's trying to steal that to get the power of the Hextech. And what I remember, Hextech was incredibly powerful. So it all makes sense. Ooh. It was kind of cool getting all these little parts. So we have, who was it first? Caitlin figuring out, okay, I'm about to be one of the people going into this to be an enforcer to help, get Victor back. Jace, who had set up this blockade, was basically like, yeah, I want to take it back, but also has found a romance with Mel Medarda. So we've got even another one. And I actually, now that the Medarda part I didn't think of, but the Mel part I know of now, as that was one of the ones I didn't know as much, but that name is very familiar and resonating with me now. Then we hit into Marcus. I don't know Marcus as much myself, if he is in Arcane or not, but I kind of like him. He has like a very gruff and revenge-filled personality, so he's got like a whole side to himself. And then Echo coming at the end, and I'm ready to see him whip out some little bits of time play, where he's going to say, oh, we did all that. Here's my Hextech time. Maybe this will have him getting it at some point. That would be kind of cool. And then he can just bat people around or whatever. Y'all, make sure to stay beautiful, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next chapter. Bye.